Welcome back to the vault. I am the Warden. Tonight, I open the second and final door. The Call of Cthulhu, Part 2. The Madness from the Sea. You will recall what was established in Part 1. The papers of a dead professor, a clay bas-relief carved in a dream. The dreams of sensitive people across the world converging on the same dark city, the same syllables, the same vast and nameless thing. A cult that has existed since before recorded history, worshipping a being that lies not dead, but dreaming beneath the Pacific Ocean, in a sunken city of cyclopean stone called Relais, waiting for the stars to come right, waiting to rise. In Part 1, we had documents and testimony. We had the scholarly accumulation of evidence, the kind of horror that builds in libraries and locked boxes. What comes tonight is different. Tonight we leave the study and go to sea. Tonight we meet a Norwegian sailor named Gustaf Johansen, second mate of the schooner Emma, who sailed into waters no chart had ever named and came back alone, white-haired, broken, and unable to speak of what he had seen. He did not speak of it, but he wrote of it. And that manuscript, recovered from his widow in Oslo after his own suspicious death, is what Francis Thurston now holds in his hands as he stands on the deck of the London boat, reading in the cold sea air the account of a man who opened a door that should have stayed closed forever. What Johansen saw, he saw. What he recorded with a sailor's plain and terrible honesty. There is no embellishment here, no literary flourish, just a man trying to put language to something that language was never designed to carry. The stars were right. The city rose. The door opened. Begin. If heaven ever wishes to grant me a boon, it will be a total effacing of the results of a mere chance which fixed my eye on a certain stray piece of shelf paper. It was an old number of an Australian journal, the Sydney Bulletin for April 18th, 1925, spread beneath mineral specimens on a storage shelf in a New Jersey museum. In it was a picture of a hideous stone image, almost identical with the statuette Inspector Legrasse had found in the Louisiana swamp. Beside it, a brief news item, the account of a mystery derelict found at sea. The story was this. The freighter Vigilant, sailing from Valparaiso, had found adrift in the South Pacific the steam yacht Alert of Dunedin, New Zealand, disabled, heavily armed, and carrying one living man and one dead. The living man was Gustaf Johansen, a Norwegian of some intelligence, second mate of the schooner Emma of Auckland, which had sailed for Callao in February with a crew of 11 men. The dead man had been his companion since some point the survivor could not recall. Johansen had been clutching, when found, a stone idol of unknown origin about a foot in height. He had given authorities almost nothing. What little he said was this, that the Emma had been attacked without warning in open ocean by the crew of the Alert, that his men had boarded and killed the attackers, that they had then sailed the captured yacht toward a coastline none of them had ever seen on any chart, that 6 of his crew had died ashore in circumstances he described only as they're falling into a rock chasm, and that thereafter he and one companion had fled. He would say no more. I traced the story across 3 continents. I went to Dunedin, where the alert had been known as an island trader with an evil reputation along the waterfront, owned by a curious group of half-castes whose frequent night meetings had attracted local curiosity, and which had set sail in great haste immediately after the earthquake and storm of March 1st. I went to Auckland, where Johansen's crew had been known as sober and reliable men. I went to Sydney, where I studied the idol, still in the museum at Hyde Park, and felt once more that chill of recognition I had first felt holding Legrasse's statuette. Geologists had declared its material a monstrous puzzle. The world, they said, held no rock like it. I thought of what old Castro had told Legrasse. They had come from the stars and had brought their images with them. I went to Oslo. I found Johansen's address in the old town, a neat and ancient building with a plastered front. A sad-faced woman in black answered my knock and told me in halting English that Gustaf Johansen was no more. He had not long survived his return. The doings at sea in 1925 had broken him. During a walk near the Gothenburg dock, a bundle of papers falling from an attic window had knocked him down. 2 sailors at once helped him to his feet. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was dead. No adequate cause was found. Heart trouble, they said. A weakened constitution. His wife gave me his manuscript. He had written it in English, she said, to keep her from being able to read it casually. A sailor's plain effort at a diary of that last awful voyage. I began reading it on the boat to London and did not stop. I will tell its gist enough to show why the sound of water against the vessel's sides became unendurable to me before I reached port. Johansen's account began with the attack by the Alert. The crew of that yacht, a dark and mixed-blooded company of Kanakas and half-castes, had opened fire without warning when the Emma refused to turn back from waters the cultists clearly wanted kept empty. In the fight that followed, the Emma began to sink, but her men managed to board the Alert and kill the attackers to the last man, losing 3 of their own, including the captain and first mate. Under Johansen's command, the remaining 8 sailed onward in the captured yacht, curious about what lay ahead in those uncharted waters, and on March 23rd, they found it. What they found rising from the Pacific was a coastline of mud and ooze and weedy cyclopean masonry that should not have existed. Stone structures of unbelievable scale, green-crusted and dripping, ascending from the sea. The proportions were all wrong. The angles were all wrong. Johansen, who had no philosophical vocabulary for what he was seeing, could only write that the geometry of the place was abnormal, that one could not be entirely sure which direction was up, that the stone surfaces seemed too vast for anything right or proper on this earth. He and his men landed on a sloping mudbank and climbed over titan, oozy blocks that could have been no mortal staircase. The very sun seemed distorted, viewed through some polarizing miasma rising from that sea-soaked perversion. Twisted menace lurked in the angles of carved rock, where a second glance showed concavity after the first had shown convexity. Something very like fright came over all of them before anything definite was seen. They searched half-heartedly for some portable souvenir to carry away. It was a sailor named Rodriguez who climbed the foot of the great monolith and shouted of what he had found. The others followed and looked up at the immense carved door, squid dragon bas-relief all too familiar, that rose before them like a great barn door of a god. They could not determine if it lay flat or slanted. The geometry of the place refused to be fixed. But Donovan felt along its edges, pressing point after point, climbing the grotesque stone molding in a direction that could only doubtfully be called upward. And then, very softly and slowly, the acre-great panel began to give inward at the top. The aperture was black, with a darkness almost material. That darkness was a positive quality. It burst forth like smoke from eon-long imprisonment, visibly darkening the sun as it slunk away into the shrunken gibbous sky on flapping membranous wings. The odor from the newly opened depths was intolerable. Then Hawkins, the quickest-eared among them, thought he heard a slopping sound from far below. Everyone listened. Everyone was still listening when it lumbered slobberingly into sight and gropingly squeezed its gelatinous green immensity through the black doorway into the tainted outside air of that poisoned city of madness. Johansen's handwriting almost gave out at this point. The thing cannot be described. There is no language for such abysms of shrieking and immemorial lunacy, such eldritch contradictions of all matter, force, and cosmic order. A mountain walked or stumbled. 2 men perished of pure fright in that accursed instant. 3 more, Donovan, Guerrera, Angstrom, were swept up by flabby claws before anyone could turn. Parker slipped and was swallowed by an angle of masonry that should not have been there. So only Bryden and Johansen reached the boat, pulling frantically for the alert as the mountainous monstrosity flopped down the slimy stones toward the water's edge. Johansen did not flee. Knowing that the thing would surely overtake the alert before full steam was up, he set the engine to full speed, ran to the deck, and reversed the wheel, driving his vessel head-on against the pursuing horror. The awful squid head with writhing feelers came nearly to the bowsprit. Johansen drove on. There was a bursting as of an exploding bladder, a slushy nastiness as of a cloven sunfish, a stench as of 1,000 opened graves, and a sound he would not put on paper. For an instant the ship was befouled by an acrid and blinding green cloud, and then there was only a venomous seething astern. The scattered plasticity of that nameless sky spawn was nebulously recombining in its hateful original form. But the alert was pulling away. The distance widened every second. After that, Johansen brooded over the idol in the cabin and attended to a few matters of food for himself and the laughing maniac beside him. Bryden had looked back and gone mad, laughing shrilly at intervals until death found him one night while Johansen wandered in delirium. The storm of April 2nd came, and then rescue, the Vigilant, the Vice Admiralty Court, the streets of Dunedin, and the long voyage back to Oslo. He could not tell anyone what had happened. They would think him mad. He would write it down. His wife must not read it. Death would be a boon if only it could blot out the memories. That was the manuscript. I placed it in the tin box beside the bas-relief and the papers of Professor Angel. I have looked upon all that the universe has to hold of horror, and even the skies of spring and the flowers of summer must ever afterward be poison to me. Cthulhu still lives, I suppose, again in that chasm of stone beneath the sea. His city has sunk again, The vigilant sailed over the spot after the April storm and found nothing. But his cult still lives. His ministers still move in the dark places of the world. What has risen may sink. What has sunk may rise. Loathsomeness waits and dreams in the deep. A time will come, but I must not and cannot think. I know too much, and the cult still lives. The door is closed. This time, perhaps for good. What Johansen saw on that coast of dripping stone cannot be named. Lovecraft understood that the most honest thing a writer can do with certain kinds of darkness is refuse to describe them fully, to let the shape of what is absent do the work that language cannot. The thing was real. The city was real. The stars were right. And then they were not. For now, if you found value in these transmissions, subscribe to The Vault. Every darkness deserves a witness, and there are more vaults yet to open. The next transmission has already been selected. You will want to be present. Until then, stay in the dark.